Let's go live to the Employment Minister Stuart Robert with me. And we had the Treasurer's debate, Stuart Robert, today. The Josh Frydenberg warning that if Labor wins, they'll revert to their natural instincts and tax and spend and so on. Is the government at risk of fighting the 2019 election and not fighting the one you're facing now?
I don't think so, Kieran. I think the Treasurer made the very obvious point that Mr Albanese is now trying to say that everything he has believed in the past is no longer true, that he has spent 26 years in public life standing up for a whole range of things he believes in, but suddenly they were all wrong and he's had a Damascus experience on the road apparently to the lodge. It's not believable. I didn't see the bright shining light, Kieran. I don't think the Australian people will believe that Mr Albanese has indeed changed from the quite hard left socialist that he was and still is.
Do you think the fact that rates have gone up puts the debate, the campaign attention specifically on the economy enough, sufficient to get the coalition back in the game? Because that is your traditional strong turf.
The Australian people will determine that, Kieran, but what it does show is that there is a choice and choices matter, and that the economy is not an easy thing to manage. It requires a stable and sensible hand, and that we are living in some really interesting and uncertain times. You've seen rates move from across the world, including the US, Canada and New Zealand, from 25 to 125 basis points, and you've seen those move relatively recently. We're moving off a very, very low emergency base. Of course, we started when we took over power in 2013 at a much higher 250 basis points. So it does demonstrate a choice. It does demonstrate that Labor can't come in and say that somehow they're John Howard light and it'll be fine, that voters do need to consider who is indeed best to manage these challenging times and who's best to manage that choice.
But have you lost a bit of that reputation, that credibility, given, well, Jim Chalmers, as he puts it, you've racked up nearly $1 trillion of debt with not enough to show for it. That's the way he puts it. Is that the risk here, that people have said, OK, we've heard enough of this mob, let's move on?
Jim Chalmers also said the test for this government will be what happens to jobs. Well, jobs were at 4% in terms of unemployment. In fact, it's 3.95%. But as I've said previously, we rounded it up to make it easier for Mr Albanese to remember. And I'm glad he remembered the cash rate today. It's been 4 weeks, which is wonderful. Jim Chalmers said the test for this government is what happens to jobs. Well, we inherited 5.7%. It's now 4%, an expectation from the RBA to get down to 3.5%. On Jim Chalmers' own test, this government is delivering for the Australian people.
When you look at the structural problems facing the budget, and I don't think either side really has come up with the answer to this, NDIS, aged care, Medicare, defence, all climbing for many decades, and the intergenerational report shows it. This is a structural deficit we face in this country. There needs to be a reckoning at some point, doesn't there?
There's no question there's pressures in the budget, and they're well understood. But at the same time, you saw in the budget that we delivered a number of weeks ago a $103 billion turnaround on what the previous forecasts were. Now, that turnaround is the largest in 70 years. We've used a small portion of that for a cost of living adjustment for Australians, not just the $250 payments, but the $420 tax offsets, as well as the indexation cut for fuel. So we've responsibly used a small portion of it, but well over 70% has remained within the budget for budget repair. And that's what a good government running a strong economy delivers for a strong future for the country, Kieran. That's what we can deliver. The budget showed that our economic management under the stewardship of the Prime Minister and the Treasurer can deliver a $103 billion turnaround. And we can leave the vast majority of that for structural repair so we can meet those pressures.
Well, more than 1% of GDP going back into the economy with the low and middle income tax offset extended, $250 checks, a fuel excise reduction. Is that inflationary at a time when we really can't afford it?
Well, the Reserve Bank made the point that the vast majority or the vast bulk of the inflation pressures we're facing now are imported. They've come from areas of fixed prices, for example, fuel, and other areas of minerals. They've come from 400% increase in the cost of containers, and those supply constraints still there, and Treasury makes the same point. But of that $103 billion turnaround, the vast bulk of that was left in terms of budget repair, Kieran, because that's what sound, sensible fiscal managers do.
But we are, as you know, in an inflationary environment by cutting the fuel excise, extending the payments, other special payments. It just seems like if you're putting money in, that's not really what you do when you're trying to cool the economy. The fiscal and monetary arms here working together, are they in sync?
They are, and again, the Reserve Bank Governor made the point in his statement yesterday, the vast bulk of the pressures coming are international and are imported. Now, we understand those. The budget measures, of course, aren't reflected in the March quarter figures that we've seen recently when it comes to inflation. We knew they were coming. We knew the pressures upon Australian people. That's why you saw that cost of living package within the budget, because we knew the
People
Australian
are still hurting,
people
though, aren't they?
Needed a dividend from the sound economic management. No one's denying the impact that inflation has upon Australians. And again, it's the reason why the Prime Minister today froze the adjustments that are normally made for what investments older Australians have, and kept those what's called deeming rates and froze it for 2 years, reflecting the cost of living pressures. That's why the Prime Minister announced a $10 reduction in the price of medicines, all of which is a dividend from good economic management.
Stuart Robert joining me live from Melbourne. Thanks for that. We'll see you next week.